But in a situation where you find that they look like the same,
not necessarily tribal or regional.
but I have said that.
All right, thank you for staying with us. You're watching Daybreak on Trust TV, reaching you from the nation's capital, right here, Abuja. Now, we'll be taking a look at the newspapers this morning and have a sense of what the stories are saying. And so we'll begin with the Daily Trust newspaper this morning, where we have the lead story, talk about the 2022 flooding. It says, farmers decry exclusion from 1.5 billion naira relief materials. It has the riders. It says, we identified beneficiaries through SEMAs, and that's according to NEMA. Farmers need flood-resistant seeds, according to experts. And that's on page 4 of the Daily Trust newspaper. Above the lead story, military kicks as PSE wants police to lead terrorism war, on page 30. 4 victims of Kaduna Mosque attack left behind 61 orphans and widows, on page 7. Experts differ as FG celebrates 400 days of zero greed collapse, on page 19. Now you have beside, well, the pictorial shows you supporters of Niger's National Council of Safeguard of the Homeland, CNSP, protest outside the Niger and French air base in Niamey, demanding the departure of French army from Niger. This protest has gone on for days now. You also have, I want to die a Muslim ex-traditional worshipper, Iya Osun, says after embracing Islam, on page 11. Also, Nigeria mulls G20 membership as Tinubu attends summit in India, on page 5. Father, 2 sons die in Anambra building collapse, on page 7. These are the main stories on Daily Trust front page.
Now let's move on to the Punch, and the lead story on the Punch newspaper today says is on election petitions, and it says tribunals decide Tinubu 25 governors cases September. Their riders attached to the story. The tribunals reserve judgment in Lagos, Sokoto, Kano orders parties resort to prayers. The second rider says APC not under pressure, says legal advisor, Labour Party, PDP confident of victory. All right, you read all of that on page 2. There are pictorials just below the lead story about, pictorials showing some of the governors, the presidential candidates, and even the president there. You get more details on page 2. And then let's take a look at above the lead story. We have domestic operations lament over 40 aircraft grounded abroad. And that's on Forex there. Page 21 has that story. Then state NLC, TUC, other workers to join nationwide strike. Page 7 has that. And the federal government plans mining firm, pushes gold and 6 minerals. Page 26. And then the bottom strip, we have GT Coal, gross profit to 347 billion naira, assets now 85 trillion naira. We have another headline here that says waste managers urge Sanwo-Olu to probe accumulated debts. Page 26 of the Punch newspaper has that story. And then the last one will be taken from the Punch this morning, says marketers get foreign investors backing for 30,000 gas station. Page 26 has that. That's about the stories we'll be taking from the Punch newspaper this morning. All
right. Now, let's take a look at the Guardian, the Nation newspaper, rather, where you have the lead story that says TUC snubs NLC strike call, calling workers out of work premature. We will continue to dialogue with government to ease subsidy pain. You also have above the masthead, illegal miners get 30-day ultimatum to vacate site. Marketers, why we can't break NNPCL's import monopoly. NMA cautions health workers on incessant strikes. Pupils' performance to determine teachers promotion in Ondo State. We also have Tinubu targets global capital in India. Flood risk rises in Lagos, Nasarawa, Bayelsa, coastal communities. These are the main stories on the Nation front page.
All right, let's move on to The Guardian. The big story there says cyber criminals exploit weak regulations to harvest data and defraud Nigerians. Page 6 has that we can see pictorials of a debit card, betting sites and all of that. And just beside it, we have single-term tenure is enough for presidents and governors. That's the editorial page of The Guardian there. Page 2 has more details, and unpaid claims of failed underwriters worsen sector's battered image. All right, you get more details there in The Guardian newspaper. And then hiking fees, fresh worry over dropout and out-of-school children. That's just be above the lead story there. And let's take a look at another one that says NLC insists on strike despite government overture as new tax regime commences. That news is on page 6 in The Guardian newspaper. Then federal government gives ultimatum to illegal miners, targets 50% GDP contribution. Page 3 has more details of that story. And that's about the headlines you can find on the front page of The Guardian newspaper.
All right. And now on the This Day newspaper this morning, the lead story there, it says Buhari saved Nigeria from graft, says Garba Shehu. It says his success in fight against corruption unprecedented. You also have above the masthead, CBN FG recorded $17.18 billion inflows, a 1.43 trillion naira fiscal deficit in the first quarter. You have Michael, why colleagues are against my leadership. You also have Tinubu, ministers, industrialists depart for G20 summit today. Also, Sanwo-Olu flags off distribution of food items in Lagos. These are the main stories on The Guardian front page. Now, let's get perspectives to some of the stories that we have on the headlines this morning. We have in the studio our guest reviewer, Suleiman Ubagaya, CEO, Sky Limit Media Group, editor and former deputy president, Nigerian Guild of Editors, with us in the studio to review some of the stories. Thank you so much for joining us on Daybreak this morning.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Well, let's begin with the lead story on the Daily Trust newspaper. A lot of watchers or observers are talking about the distribution of government interventions. This particular one is about flood victims of the 2022, and we are hearing the farmers are decrying exclusion from the 1.5 billion naira relief materials that were meant to share. And that distribution is by NEMA. So we find these problems all the time where government will make provision for some kind of interventions to ameliorate the sufferings of Nigerians, but then the distribution process becomes a problem. So it is even for the palliatives that are currently being shared, in the states. What do you make of this?
Well, it is very unfortunate that at this point in our history, that this is happening. Because you see, food security has direct relationship with national security. And obviously what is happening is that NEMA is abdicating its responsibility. It should have ensured that the state emergency management agencies that it is now claiming was bestowed or delegated the responsibility of sharing relief materials to farmers has done or have done their jobs properly. You see, the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs, Disaster and Social Development has estimated that the direct economic losses incurred as a result of flooding was to the tune of $6.6 billion, and 7 frontline states have lost at least 944,000 hectares of farmland. We have lost almost 666 people to flood, as well as displacement of over 2 million people. So if there are people that are in demand of relief materials, it is the farmers, you know. Unfortunately, NEMA, that should have taken its responsibility more seriously, decided to do it by delegation, you know, using the state emergency management agencies, which are mostly, I'm sorry to say, politicized. You find that in many states, if the governor is of PDP or APC or any other party, members of his party are likely to be the majority beneficiaries, not necessarily even the actual farmers. So peasant farmers are at the receiving end, and already flood has wasted, like I said, a lot of our farmlands, I mean, across the nation.
Yes.
So
In any case, going by the number you quoted, the amount of losses that were incurred as a result of this, 1.5 billion naira, is that even anything to, you know, take home, comparing the losses that were incurred? Yes, the government may not be able to replace all that have been lost, but at least shouldn't we have been able to do better?
no, definitely it's a drop in the ocean. We should do better. For example, even though President Tinubu has now downsized the number of people that will be accompanying him to the United Nations General Assembly later this month, but you realize that the money they spend is in billions of naira. So if you can spend billions of naira in escorts, travel, air tickets and other hotels and other expenses on conferences, why don't you spend more in terms of relief materials to our farmers that are in dire need of it?
So clearly there's a disconnect in this sharing formula.
Yeah.
And NEMA has given the responsibility to SEMA, according to reports. What better way could NEMA have done this?
For me, it shouldn't have done so through SEMA. Of course, SEMA are institutions established by the law, but like I did point out, there is a lot of politics in practically all the states of Nigeria. The governing party, that is, for example, Kano, that is being ruled by NNPP, Kaduna, APC, Rivers, PDP, and the rest, all the states, you find that if the governor is of APC, the greater number of beneficiaries are going to be APC members. So there are a lot of politics, and this politics is hardly applicable when it comes to the national stage. So having known that, NEMA should have done the distribution of relief material through its offices in the states, rather than delegating states emergency management agency to do so for them.
Looking at, is it the same? I mean, this is likely the same fate with the distribution of the palliatives that has been rolled out by the federal government, which is why a lot of people do not really have confidence in it. Labour, for instance, is threatening to embark on a strike because they said, well, they are not even aware of this 5 billion naira and all that, and the meetings between the federal government and the NLC has literally not produced any results. So how can we, you know, gain that trust back? Because obviously there's no trust in the system to ensure that the people that are actually in need, you know, are actually met with this provision.
Well, it is the responsibility of government to ensure the right persons are appointed to the right positions, and those people should be properly profiled. The DSS should be made to investigate the past, the present, well, I wouldn't say the future, you know, of any prospective appointee, to make sure they are trustworthy, to make sure they are patriots. Because you see, like talking about palliatives, some states are still claiming that the 5 billion naira that has been promised or earmarked by the federal government has not even reached them. And even if it reaches them, just like I said in the case of distribution of relief materials using SEMA, chances are that politicians of the same political party with the governor are going to benefit more. You know, this is just the practice in Nigeria, and it is most unfortunate. So talking about trust, government, especially at the federal level, must ensure that the right persons are appointed to the right positions.
Do we have any other better way of doing this? Apart from sharing of items such as this, is there any other better approach that can ensure that at least the majority of the people benefit from whatever government intervention there is.
Transport palliatives, for instance.
Yeah, you are very right. And you know, they say there is this Chinese exam that says, don't give me fish, teach me how to catch fish, something like that. Just as you pointed out, transport palliative is far more effective than cash or even food stop distribution. Because you see, people are talking about one bag of rice being shared to a whole ward. You understand? And that ward could be constituting, like in highly populous states like Kano, Lagos, Kaduna, and the rest. You realize that probably up to 100,000 people will be assigned only one bag of rice. So it's another drop in the ocean. It won't go anywhere. You understand? So that is why the palliatives, talking about palliatives, is as good as ineffective. It won't achieve the objectives because certainly it is far, far inadequate.
Okay, talking about that, the NLC has threatened strike again, and that on the 5th, which is on Tuesday, which is tomorrow, they'll be embarking on a strike. So what should they be pressing home at this point? The palliative has been rolled out to many states, and they're still not agreeing with the system of the government. So what should they be pressing home at this? Is it for subsidy removal or for something else?
Okay, first of all, there is it's so unfortunate that already they are speaking in discordant tunes, the NLC and the TUC. These are the preeminent labor organizations that should protect the interests of workers in Nigeria. TUC is saying it is premature to call workers to strike. And of course, NLC is saying at least let's go for 2 days warning strike to warn the government to wake up to its responsibilities. I don't know whether what the government needs to do, honestly, in terms of
is it the subsidy removal? Bring back subsidy?
Yeah, I think transport palliative, as you pointed out, is the best way to go. You understand, and of course, the economy should be strengthened. It should be improved. You know, Nigeria is currently the 30th biggest economy in the world, and our GDP growth rate is just 1.6% or thereabouts. You know, it's not encouraging at all. So we should have an economy that works for all, you know, that produces jobs as they do in the other developed countries, so that we do not have to always rely on things like palliatives. And of course, talking about fuel subsidy, I have said it on this forum that government has a responsibility to ensure that the deregulation it intends to practice or go about of the oil industry should be a sort of guided deregulation. It shouldn't be a wholesome deregulation because you can't allow market forces to determine everything. Because these are things that have direct bearing on the national security. By the time you allow a lot of hopelessness, a lot of hunger in the land, then that will impinge on the national security, and the cost of handling that could end up wiping out any gain that could be made from fuel subsidy by the government. For example, I remember the Tinubu administration saying it saved, was it 600 billion or thereabouts in the first 2 months of fuel subsidy. But how much does it spend in tackling national security? I mean, insecurity in the country. You know, I'm sure it's more than that.
Now, a lot of people have said that, you know, NLC always calls for protest, always calls for strike. In the last few months, this is not the first time they're threatening to go on a protest or a strike. I want to have your thought on this. If they go back to the table and they come to a consensus with the government that this is what should be done, and at the end of the day, it doesn't happen, and then they just go back on this strike, what does this mean? Do they still have the confidence of Nigerians? Because some people are already losing it.
Yeah, a lot of confidence has been lost because, unfortunately, I think the unfortunate aspect of it is that NLC has been allowed by law to partake in politics. For example, in the last presidential election, NLC openly supported the Labour Party. I think it is wrong because NLC represents the entire workers of Nigeria, both in the private and public sector. It shouldn't be involved in partisan politics. Now that President Tinubu is the president of Nigeria, there are APC members who feel there is no reason for them to support an NLC that is Labour Party inclined. So the fact that politics has been brought to the mix has now led a situation where only a section of Nigerians have, a semblance of trust or confidence in the NLC. So for me, the law that permits NLC to engage in partisan politics should be abrogated, so that at least they should be seen to be national, and that's the way I see it, honestly speaking.
All right.
Could that be the reason why a lot of Nigerians have lost confidence in NLC and, this is happening at this point? I think there are other reasons too.
Yeah, other reasons, of course, have to do with the fact that government feel, especially in developing economies like ours, you cannot compel government to take any action. And government has a way of, sabotaging any strike action called by either NLC or any labor organization. There is also the issue of hunger in the land. There are people who cannot feed their families unless they go out every day to make 500, 1,000, 2,000 naira. So by the time you call for strike and it becomes elongated, these people will now be compelled to go back to, their businesses, thereby ruining the strike called upon by the NLC, which ultimately is in their interest. So these are the kind of things. You see, the elite members of the Nigerian society have been using hunger as a weapon to inflict all kinds of injustice on especially the poor citizenry.
Okay. All right, now let's look at another story here that talks about, the fight against insurgency. It says military kicks as PSC wants police to lead terrorism war. That's a police service commission now advising the federal government to reduce the military component in the fight against insurgency and allow the Nigerian police to take the lead as the agency saddled with the security of internal affairs in the country. So let's get your thoughts on this. This is, I don't know how Nigerians are going to react to this statement, really, because looking at the Nigerian police and the Nigerian military and how they have individually performed, in different instances and all of that. What do you make of this?
Well, the person who made the statement, who is the chairman of the Police Service Commission, IGP Solomon Arasi, is someone I have immense respect for, and definitely he is one of the finest officers the police force has produced in Nigeria. But with all due respect, I want to disagree with him. For me, it should continue to be a joint effort. This issue about who will lead or who will follow has been the bane of our progress in Nigeria for years. You understand? And there are so many issues that should be tackled. Talking about confidence, the people need to be confident that the authority or the institution or the security organization that is leading the war is the one they can confide in terms of information sharing, in terms of other forms of cooperation. The police is being accused left, right, and center almost every day of one form of malfeasance or the other, especially corruption. A lot of people feel the police easily compromises when you give them information, even at the peripheral level, for example, at the divisions or the outstations in villages, towns, and cities. So it does not look like the people will have confidence in when you have such an institution leading the counter-insurgency war. So for me, it should continue to be a shared effort. And even though, of course, the military has been trained to defend the territorial integrity of Nigeria, that is taken about maybe external war and the rest, but they have been trained over time. I remember when General Tua Brate was the chief of army staff, the longest serving in Nigeria's history, a lot of training and retraining have been conducted. A lot of military officers and men have benefited from that training. which encompasses the aspect of civil-military relations, and also deepening professionalism in terms of fighting the insurgency and terrorism.
I mean, it's a known fact that there is a constitutional provision that provides that the Nigerian military, even though it is meant to protect the territorial integrity of the country, it can be called upon where there is internal insurrection that, needs their support, which is beyond the Nigerian police and the rest of them. So should we be having this conversation? Because the Chief of Armed Forces, that's the President, the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, the President, thought it wise, to bring in the military into the whole fight against insurgency, which we can all admit at least that it has truly gone beyond what a single police, I would say a single security architecture can handle, given the time that it has taken the country to deal with it, and the spread that it has, and the number of security personnel that we have in the country as well.
Exactly. We all need, all hands are now needed on deck. This is not time for us to start talking about division. It is time for us to start talking about unity, unifying all the forces that we can muster, so that we can crush those enemies of the nation. I don't think it's fair or right for the Police Service Commission to start talking about prioritizing the police above the military in terms of fighting counterinsurgency.
I don't want to see this as an interagency rivalry, but you've talked about training and retraining of the police. The police that we have right now, do you think that they can counter terrorism?
No, definitely they cannot. Because even with the combination of the military, it has not been a tea party. Look at all the casualties we keep experiencing. Of course, there are very many achievements that have been recorded that are not yet in the public space. And of course, maybe we should blame the security services for that. Although, of course, they accuse the media of prioritizing, news that have to do with victories or achievements of the enemies of the nation, But certainly having one organization or security organization, the police or the military alone fighting this war, definitely will not augur well for the nation. Okay. So it should be a unified effort.
All right. There's a lead story here of interest. The former presidential spokesperson, Garba Shehu, is speaking up. He said Buhari saved Nigeria from graft. He says that his success in the fight against corruption is unprecedented, seen like never before, and all that. Let me get your reaction to this.
Well, honestly, with all due respect to Malam Garba Shehu, who is my godfather in journalism, I want to disagree with him, honestly. The Buhari administration, there are two things, honestly. Buhari as a person is reputed to be incorruptible. I want to agree with that. But the box stopped at his table when he was the president. I remember President Harry Truman of the United States saying the box stops here. When he was the president, he wrote it on his decks that the box stops here. That underscores the need for a president to be wholly responsible for activities of his government. But we had in the administration of President Buhari a situation where even though the president was reputed to be incorruptible, there have been very many cases of corruption at unprecedented scale. So I wonder how Malam Garba, my senior brother that I have a lot of respect for, will now claim the Buhari administration has recorded that its corruption fight is unprecedented. With all due respect, it is entirely very, very wrong. In contrast, there are a lot of Nigerians who feel, even though the president was not corrupt, but he allowed a lot of corruption to fester under his watch. We have situations, I don't want to mention names for obvious reasons, but look at the Nigerian air case as an example. President Buhari, former President Buhari was there when the then Minister of Aviation brought, shamelessly, with all due respect, permit me to use the word, brought an aircraft from Ethiopia. Painted it in Nigerian air colors and presented it as our own product. It was a completely fraudulent situation.
Not to mention not the Attorney General, but the auditor. Is it the Auditor General now?
Okay, Accountant General.
Accountant General.
Exactly.
Accountant General's case, where we had about the 90-something
and
billion.
some of these cases, we don't even know, the level which they are right now. Some of them feel like they've been swept under the carpet.
Yeah,
because we've not seen Hadi Sirika being summoned and asked questions.
That's a tragedy in Nigeria. We don't discourage corruption. We don't, punish perpetrators of evil. We keep encouraging them by condoning them, by allowing them or giving them, by maybe making sure the right punishment is meted on them. You understand? So it's unfortunate that what we do is encouraging corruption directly or indirectly in Nigeria.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Suleiman Ubagaya, CEO Sky Limit Media Group. He's also editor and former deputy president, Nigerian Guild of Editors. Thank you for joining us on Daybreak this morning.